My family told me I would never amount to anything. When I dropped out, "You're wasting your life," they said. I smiled and said nothing. When they heard about my new company, it was a Sunday morning, and I was sitting alone on the back porch of my parents' house. My coffee had gone cold, but I didn't notice. Their voices echoed from inside, bouncing off the walls like they always did, like a chorus of disappointment. "You're wasting your life, James." That was my mother, her tone sharp, slicing through the thin pane of glass that separated me from her world. "You'll never amount to anything," Dad chimed in, not even glancing up from his phone. And then there was my sister, Kelly, who always managed to twist the knife a little deeper. "What's the plan, Jimmy? Living off scraps, thinking you're some kind of genius?" Her voice was dripping with condescension. I sat there stone-faced. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just sipped my bitter coffee and looked out at the overgrown backyard. Because what they didn't know, what none of them could imagine, was that while they were busy ridiculing me, I was quietly working on something. Something big. It started with an idea scribbled on a napkin, a few phone calls made in secret, and a long string of sleepless nights in the tiny, cramped apartment I'd rented after dropping out of college. I didn't have much, just a battered old laptop, a head full of ideas, and a stubborn refusal to give up. Every insult they hurled at me fueled a quiet, burning determination. I poured everything I had into building this startup, working during the day as a barista to cover the bills and coding late into the night. My friends thought I was crazy. My family thought I was delusional. But I had a vision. And I knew, deep down, that I could pull it off. That Sunday morning was the last time I let their words get under my skin. I sat there, listening to their laughter and their scorn, and I made a silent vow to myself: I'm going to show them all. One day, they'll regret every single word. I started seeing the first cracks in their indifference the following winter. It was subtle at first, Dad hesitating before launching into his usual tirade about my wasted potential. Mom glancing at me with something almost like curiosity when I mentioned I had meetings in the city. Kelly kept her smug little smirks, but even she seemed less certain, less sharp with her digs. They hadn't caught on yet, of course. They didn't know the truth behind those meetings. They didn't know that the freelance gigs I mentioned offhandedly were actually investor pitches. They didn't know that the clients I was seeing were early-stage partners who believed in my product as much as I did. And oh, they definitely didn't know about the small but growing buzz online. The startup forums, the LinkedIn connections, the whispers in the local entrepreneur circles. The idea I had scribbled on that napkin? It was catching on. People were listening. Investors were paying attention. I remember one night, after an especially brutal dinner where Kelly joked that I'd be begging for change by next year, I sat down at my laptop and checked my email. There it was, an offer. My first real funding. A legitimate investor, willing to back my idea. I just stared at the screen, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it echoing in my ears. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I sat there, thinking about everything, every nasty comment, every dismissive shake of their heads, every time they told me I was throwing my life away. I could almost hear them, even now, upstairs laughing at something meaningless on TV. I smiled quietly to myself and finally typed my response: let's set up a meeting. I'm ready to move forward. A few months later, the startup wasn't just a pipe dream anymore, it was real. We were renting office space downtown. The product, a platform designed to streamline remote team collaboration, was attracting serious attention. By spring, we had not just one, but 3 investors lined up, each one eager to pour money into something they believed was the next big thing. But back home, in my family's cramped living room, nothing had changed. Dad still sat with his feet up on the coffee table, shaking his head and muttering about how I'd wasted my education. Mom still asked when I was going to get a real job. Kelly still shot me her practice smirks whenever I said I was too busy to join them for one of their endless family get-togethers. They didn't know I had signed a 6-figure funding deal that very morning. They didn't know I was now paying salaries, not just for myself, but for a growing team of engineers, designers, and marketers. They didn't know the company had been featured on a tech blog that week, generating buzz far beyond our little town. I could have told them. Part of me wanted to. But I didn't. Not yet. I waited. I wanted to see how far their disbelief would go. How long they would cling to their certainty that I was a failure before they were forced to confront the truth. Instead, I nodded along, let them make their snide remarks, and quietly checked my phone under the table, where a new email notification had just popped up. Forbes wants to schedule an interview. My pulse quickened. I hid my smile behind a sip of water. Pass the potatoes, Dad grumbled. I did. And I didn't say a word. The morning the Forbes article dropped, I was sitting in the same coffee shop where I'd worked during those long months of coding into the night. It felt almost poetic, sitting there at the counter while the barista, who didn't recognize me as the guy who used to mop the floors, poured my espresso. I watched as the story went live. Meet the founder of Skyward Sync, the startup revolutionizing remote collaboration. It read, accompanied by a sharp, professional photo of me in a tailored suit, my first real one, the same one I'd bought just for the occasion. The article sang praises, how the platform was disrupting the market, how I'd gone from college dropout to tech visionary, how investors were lining up to back the next phase. My phone didn't stop buzzing. Emails, LinkedIn requests, old friends I hadn't heard from in years suddenly, remembering our connection. I took a deep breath, sipping my coffee, and let the moment settle over me. But I wasn't done yet. That afternoon, I rented a car, a sleek, black Tesla, and headed to my parents' house. I pulled up to the curb just as they were returning from a grocery run. Dad was fumbling with the bags, Mom was scolding him about dropping the eggs, and Kelly was scrolling through her phone, leaning against the porch railing. I stepped out of the car in my tailored suit, sunglasses on, holding a bottle of champagne in one hand and a stack of shiny, gold-foiled invitations in the other. Their jaws dropped. Hey, I said, my voice calm, controlled. Figured I'd drop by. They gawked at me as if I'd descended from another planet. Kelly's phone slipped from her hand and hit the porch floor with a clatter. My mother's mouth fell open. Dad straightened up, his brow furrowing. What's going on? Mom finally stammered. I held up the bottle of champagne. Celebrating, I said. Skyward Sync just closed a multi-million-dollar round of funding. Thought you'd want to know. The silence was deafening. For a long moment, no one said a word. Then, finally, Kelly let out a weak, "Wait, you're serious?" I nodded, smirking. Dead serious. I handed them each an invitation from the stack I carried. Gold-foiled, embossed with my company's logo, it was for a celebration party, an exclusive rooftop event downtown, complete with catering, music, and a guest list that read like the who's who of the tech world. Mom's hands trembled as she turned the invitation over. "Is this for real?" she whispered. I tilted my head, feigning casual indifference. "Yeah. We're celebrating the funding deal. Oh, and we're featured in Forbes. You might have heard about it." Dad's face flushed a deep red. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. Kelly stared at me, her lips parted, disbelief etched across her face. "So," I continued, stepping back toward the car, "I guess I wasn't wasting my life after all, huh?" Their silence was almost too perfect. I wanted them to say something, to admit they were wrong, to grovel, to apologize, but they didn't. They just stood there, speechless, as I got back into the car and rolled down the window. "Oh," I added with a little grin, "I brought gifts. Consider it a thank you for all your support over the years." I reached into the back seat and pulled out a few high-end shopping bags, luxury brands they couldn't even dream of affording. I set them gently on the curb by their feet. Then, with one last nod, I pulled away from the curb, the Tesla's engine humming softly. In the rearview mirror, I caught one last glimpse of their stunned faces. And for the first time in years, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. But even as I savored that moment, I knew this wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. The party was everything I'd imagined it would be, sleek, glamorous, filled with laughter and clinking glasses, set against the backdrop of a city skyline bathed in golden sunset light. There were investors, partners, journalists, old colleagues who'd once looked at me with skepticism and now regarded me with admiration. But what struck me most was how easy it was for people to pretend they'd always believed in you once you'd made it. I caught familiar faces, distant relatives, old classmates, even some neighbors who'd always dismissed me as the college dropout who couldn't hack it. They smiled, shook my hand, and congratulated me as though they had been my biggest supporters all along. And then, as if on cue, my family arrived. They showed up dressed a little too nicely, trying to fit in, their faces strained with forced smiles. Mom hugged me stiffly, Dad clapped me on the back with a rehearsed chuckle, and Kelly practically dripped with fake enthusiasm. "Oh, Jimmy, we're so proud of you!" she gushed, her voice sugary sweet. I smiled, but my eyes were cold. "Glad you could make it," I said, my tone smooth, unreadable. We posed for photos, exchanged pleasantries, but beneath it all, there was a tension, a silent understanding that none of this erased the past. I knew what they were thinking. They thought this was their chance to latch onto my success, to bask in the glow of what I'd built. And for a fleeting moment, I considered playing along. Maybe I could let them have this, pretend that we were one big happy family now that I was a success. But as I watched them sipping champagne and laughing with people they barely knew, I felt a sharp, sudden clarity. They didn't deserve a place in this new chapter of my life. I stood there, glass of champagne in hand, watching my family navigate the crowd like they belonged. It was almost laughable, the way they sidled up to my investors and tried to act like they were the ones who'd supported me from the start. I heard Dad telling someone how proud we are of James and all he's accomplished, while Mom chimed in with, "He's always been so driven, ever since he was a kid." Kelly even threw in a self-deprecating giggle, saying, "We always knew he was destined for greatness." I almost choked on my drink. The audacity. The rewriting of history, right in front of me. I excused myself from a conversation with a venture capitalist and walked over to where they were gathered. The words felt heavy on my tongue, but I was ready. I'd rehearsed this moment in my head 1,000 times. "Hey, could I get a moment with you three?" I said, keeping my voice light but my expression firm. They turned toward me, surprised, but nodded. I led them to a quieter corner of the terrace, away from the curious eyes and the polite murmurs. The city lights sparkled below us, a sharp contrast to the tension crackling in the air. "I'm glad you came," I started. "But let's be clear about something." Mom's smile wavered. "Of course, darling." I let out a soft laugh. "No, I mean it. I know why you're here. And I get it, you see the success, the recognition, the money. But none of it erases what you said. What you did." Dad's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. Kelly folded her arms, her smirk faltering. I continued, my voice low and steady. "I remember every time you called me a failure. Every time you said I was wasting my life. Every time you mocked me for chasing something you couldn't understand. And now, here we are, with you trying to act like you were always in my corner." There was a beat of silence, broken only by the distant hum of the city below. "I'm not doing this to be cruel," I said quietly. "I'm doing it because I finally realized something. Just because your family doesn't mean you're entitled to a place in my life. You made your choice back then, and now, I'm making mine." Mom's face crumpled, her eyes glistening with something between shock and indignation. "James, we didn't mean." I held up a hand. "No. I'm not interested in excuses. You said what you said. You showed me exactly where I stood in your lives. And now, I'm choosing not to let you stand in mine." Kelly's voice was brittle. "So what? You're cutting us off?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight lift from my chest. "No. I'm just not inviting you in. Not into this. Not into my company, my success, my future. This moment is mine. And the people who truly supported me, who believed in me when it mattered, they're the ones who get to share it." Dad's lips thinned, his pride prickled. But he didn't argue. He knew deep down that I was right. I set my half-empty glass down on a nearby table. "Enjoy the party," I said softly. "But don't expect a place at my table." Then I turned and walked away, leaving them standing there in the corner, their false smiles cracking, their pride deflating under the weight of their own choices. As I rejoined my team, laughing and toasting to the future, I felt a quiet, resolute satisfaction settle over me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just chasing success, I was defining it. On my terms. And without them. The days after the party were a blur of interviews, strategy meetings, and congratulatory messages. Investors kept calling, old friends reached out, and articles about Skyward Sync were being shared all over social media. My inbox was a flood of people who, until recently, had either dismissed me or outright ignored my efforts. It was almost surreal. But despite all the noise, I couldn't stop thinking about that night. About the look on my mother's face, her lips parted in a desperate plea. About the way my father's shoulders had stiffened, his pride finally cracking under the weight of my words. And about Kelly, standing there, her smug grin melting into something bitter and unfamiliar. They thought they could just slide back into my life as if their years of dismissal and ridicule never happened. They thought success would soften me, make me forget. They were wrong. I didn't return their calls the next day. Or the day after. When Kelly sent me a text, "Let's put the past behind us, can we meet up?" I left it unread. When Mom called and left a voicemail, "James, we're family. We need to talk. Let's not let this come between us," I deleted it without listening to the rest. And then came the visit. It was a gray Saturday afternoon when I heard the knock at my door. I was in my apartment downtown, the one I'd upgraded to after the funding deal went through, when I opened it and found them standing there. All three of them. Mom with her hands clasped tightly, Dad with a look of awkward defiance, and Kelly just looking tired. "We need to talk," Mom said softly, her voice trembling. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "About what?" "About us," Dad said gruffly. "About this whole situation." I said nothing, letting the silence stretch. Finally, Kelly spoke up. "We didn't mean to be so harsh before. We were scared, you know? We just wanted what was best for you." I laughed, short and humorless. "What was best for me? Or best for you?" Her face paled. "That's not fair." "No," I said, my voice low and steady. "What's not fair is the years of scorn. The belittling. The dinners where you mocked me in front of everyone. The times you told me I was throwing my life away because I refused to follow your script." Mom stepped forward, her eyes glassy. "But we're family. We can make this right. You're successful now. We're proud of you. Can't we start fresh?" I met her gaze, feeling the weight of all the times I had craved her approval, her love, her simple acknowledgement. "That's just it," I said quietly. "Now that I've proven you wrong, you want to rewrite the story. You want to pretend you were always there, cheering me on. But I remember. I remember every word, every sneer, every moment of doubt you piled onto me. And I don't need that in my life anymore." Dad clenched his jaw. "So what? You're just going to shut us out?" I sighed, stepping back into the apartment and shaking my head. "No. I'm just not going to let you leech off my success. You didn't believe in me then, and you don't get to celebrate with me now. That chapter is closed." Kelly's voice cracked. "James, we're sorry." I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in years. And I realized that maybe, for a fleeting moment, there was genuine regret in her eyes. But it wasn't enough. "I know you are," I said quietly. "But sorry doesn't fix everything. It doesn't erase the years you made me feel small. And it doesn't earn you a seat at my table." I stepped back inside and gently closed the door. I stood there for a long moment, listening as their footsteps faded down the hallway. There was no anger, no triumph. Just a calm, quiet resolve. I wasn't the same person they tried to break. I had built something they couldn't tear down. And I wasn't going to let them in just because it was convenient for them now. After they left, silence settled over my apartment. I sat there, staring at the closed door, my heart heavy but steady. This wasn't easy. It wasn't the victorious, triumphant feeling I'd imagined all those sleepless nights when I dreamed of proving them wrong. It was something quieter, heavier, a bittersweet acknowledgement that while I had finally earned their attention, it came too late and for the wrong reasons. I threw myself into work over the next few weeks. The company was growing fast. New hires, expanding offices, strategic partnerships. It was exhilarating. But no matter how much I accomplished, a small, persistent ache lingered in the background, a reminder that the family I'd once wanted so badly to impress was now part of a past I was determined to leave behind. Then came the awards ceremony. We were up for a major innovation award, and the entire team was buzzing with excitement. The event was black tie, high profile, filled with tech leaders, investors, and media. I stood at the edge of the ballroom, adjusting the cufflinks on my tailored suit, scanning the crowd. My team was there, grinning, taking selfies, soaking up the moment. The night was ours. And yet, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a familiar silhouette, Kelly. She was there, standing near the back, in a dress that was just a little too formal, her expression uncertain. My stomach twisted. I hadn't invited her. None of my family had been invited. How did she even get in? Before I could approach, the announcer called my name. I took a breath, squared my shoulders, and walked onto the stage. The applause washed over me, but I barely heard it. The lights were blinding, the cameras flashing, but my mind was elsewhere. I accepted the award, a sleek, glass sculpture engraved with my name and the company's logo, and stood at the microphone. I could have delivered the usual speech, thanks to the investors, the team, the supporters. But instead, I found myself saying something else. I'd like to dedicate this award to everyone who told me I'd never make it, I said, my voice steady and clear. To everyone who said I was wasting my life, that I was a fool for chasing a dream. To everyone who laughed at my ambition. You were wrong. And tonight, this award belongs not just to me, but to the version of myself who believed in me when no one else did. The applause was louder this time, almost thunderous. But I wasn't listening. I glanced toward the back of the room where Kelly had been standing, but she was gone. Disappeared into the crowd. I felt a pang of something, regret maybe, or just the final severing of a thread that had been frayed for years. I left the stage to a storm of congratulations. My team clapped me on the back, my friends cheered, but I kept looking toward the door, half expecting her to reappear. She didn't. Later that night, I checked my phone and found a single message from her. I guess I was wrong. Congratulations. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then deleted the message without replying. This wasn't about payback anymore. It wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about finally stepping out of their shadow and into the light I'd created for myself. And that light didn't need them in it.